She was accused of theft, but when the billionaire checked the cameras, he saw the unthinkable. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss stories like this that prove how quickly life can change. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching this video from right now? The story does not begin with happiness, nor with the glittering promise of a mansion chandeliers. It begins with chaos, an accusation that tore through the silence of a grand hall like a thunderclap. The servants froze mid-step, the air thick with whispers, and the clinking of crystal glasses came to a sudden halt. All eyes turned to her. "You think you can steal from this house?" A voice spat, trembling with both anger and triumph. A velvet box, its lid open, revealed empty space where a diamond necklace should have been. The box was thrust forward like evidence in a trial. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She stood still, her hands trembling, her face pale, unable to comprehend how the theft had been linked to her. She had never even touched that box, let alone dared to dream of wearing what it once held. Yet the accusing voice rose louder, feeding the hungry stares of the room. It was her. I saw her take it. The humiliation spread like fire. Her knees nearly gave in, but pride held her spine straight. Words trembled on her lips. I didn't, but they were drowned in the rush of murmurs. Some eyes glared with disgust, others with pity, but none with trust. And then came the silence. Heavy, expectant. A man's voice cut through it. Deep, measured, laced with something colder than disbelief, suspicion. "Is this true?" he asked. His tone carried the weight of power, of ownership over everything within these marble walls. His gaze locked on her, sharp and unyielding. Her throat closed. The truth wanted to burst out, but her fear chained it down. She shook her head slowly, desperately. "No, I swear I didn't." Yet doubt was already painted across every face. In the world she stood in, the word of a servant against the word of another, especially one who carried herself with polished pride, meant nothing. That night, the air in a mansion was colder than the winter outside. Her world shrank to a single thought. This is the end. I will be cast out with nothing but shame. But what no one knew, what not even she dared to hope, was that the truth had already been captured by silent eyes no one could bribe or deceive. Hidden high in the corners of those golden halls, the cameras had watched it all unfold. And the man who asked the question, the one whose voice froze the crowd, would soon learn that the story was not what it seemed. The night after the accusations stretched endlessly, as though the mansion itself wanted to swallow her whole. She lay in her small room at the farthest end of the servants' wing, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying the voices in her head. Sharp, accusing, venomous. It was her. I saw her take it. Those words carved themselves into her chest like a wound that refused to close. Her fingers twisted the thin blanket, and tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had been through humiliation before, in different forms, in different places, but this was worse. This was not just shame. It was a sentence, one that could strip away the only livelihood she had. The job wasn't just work, it was survival. Far away, down marble corridors, laughter and music floated faintly from the grand hall. The world of the rich had already moved on, sipping champagne, forgetting that a woman's entire life had just been ripped apart before their very eyes. She felt the cruel distance between those two worlds, the gold and the dust, so vividly that it made her chest ache. Her mind wandered back to the reason she had come here in the first place. A small town with cracked sidewalks. A mother whose body had grown frail too soon. Bills piling on the table. Ink smudged with her father's trembling signature. A younger brother with hungry eyes, waiting for food that never seemed enough. She had promised herself she would endure anything if it meant sending money home. She had promised herself she would remain invisible, obedient, unquestioned. Yet here she was, at the center of a storm she had never called upon. The betrayal cut deeper because she knew who had done this. She could still hear the edge of satisfaction in that voice. The colleague who had always eyed her with disdain, whispering behind her back that she thought she was better than the rest. She hadn't wanted to believe those whispers could turn into daggers. But they had, and the dagger had struck in the most public way possible. Still, there was something strange in how quickly it had happened. Too fast, too precise, almost as if it had been planned long before the necklace even went missing. A setup so clean it left no room for her defense. Her chest rose and fell as fear turned into anger. She whispered into the darkness, almost like a prayer, almost like a curse. I didn't steal. One day, someone will see the truth. And as if the universe itself wanted to answer, at that very hour, in another part of the mansion, the man whose voice had questioned her stood in his study, the glow of the fire casting shadows across his face. His hand rested on the glass of bourbon he hadn't touched, his eyes locked not on the fire, but on the dark corner where a small monitor flickered quietly. He had learned long ago that wealth attracts deceit. He had cameras installed in every corner of his empire, not just for security, but because trust was a currency too expensive to gamble with. He leaned closer, watching the footage rewind silently, his jaw tightening. He wanted to know for himself. Was she guilty, or had someone woven a trap? The images played. Frames roll back, and there, frozen in time, was not her, but another hand slipping the velvet box into the shadows. His glass tilted. The bourbon spilled slightly over the rim. He didn't notice. His eyes narrowed as he whispered to himself. So, it wasn't her. But if it wasn't her, then why was she targeted? And why did it feel like this truth could unravel more than just a petty theft? The mansion slept unaware, but the balance of power had just shifted quietly, dangerously, and the one accused had no idea that her fate was already turning. The following morning dawned with a false serenity. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors, glinting off chandeliers, painting the mansion in gold as if nothing had happened the night before. But beneath that brightness, the air was thick with poison. Servants walked with hurried steps, their eyes darting toward her and then away, as though looking at her for too long would taint them. She felt their whispers brushing her back like invisible thorns. "She's still here?" someone muttered. "They should have sent her away last night." Another hissed. Imagine the shame, to steal from the master himself. Her chest tightened. Every step she took felt heavier than the last. She carried a tray of tea through the corridors, but the porcelain rattled faintly in her trembling hands. She wasn't afraid of breaking the cups. She was afraid of breaking herself. At the far end of the corridor, she saw her. The one whose voice had sentenced her. The woman with perfectly arranged hair, always polished, always with a smug smile carved into her lips. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, the truth burned between them. She had done this. She had planted the evidence. She had enjoyed every second of it. The smile grew sharper. "Careful with the tea. Wouldn't want you to drop it again." The words dripped with venom. The mocking tone was louder than a shout. She wanted to scream back, to expose her, to tear the mask from her face in front of everyone. But she knew what would happen if she did. Who would believe the word of the accused over the one who had framed her? So she lowered her eyes, bowed her head, and continued walking. But inside, a storm was building. Far away, behind heavy oak doors, the master of the house sat in silence. His hand hovered over the pause button of the monitor, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. He had seen enough. The camera had caught it all. The sly glance of the envious servant, the way she had slipped into the room when no one was watching, her quick fingers tucking the necklace away where it would later be discovered. But why? That was the question gnawing at him. Why target the quiet girl who had never drawn attention to herself? Why orchestrate such humiliation in front of everyone? It wasn't about the necklace. It was about breaking someone, destroying her. He leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning through the threads of power and manipulation he had seen countless times in his life. Betrayal was no stranger to him. Greed was as common in his world as the wine poured into crystal glasses each night. But this was different. It wasn't greed for jewels. It was hatred for her. His fingers drummed against the desk. He knew he had two choices: reveal the truth immediately, or wait, observe, and understand the depths of this scheme. Something inside him whispered that patience would reveal far more than outrage ever could. Meanwhile, she walked into the dining hall with the tray, placing cups with trembling fingers before the wealthy guests. Their conversations dipped as she passed, eyes following her like vultures circling prey. Her cheeks burned crimson, but she didn't let her voice crack when she spoke. "Tea, sir?" "Tea, madam." But one man's gaze lingered longer than the others. He studied her, not with disgust, not with pity, but with calculation. He had noticed her humiliation the night before, and though he hadn't spoken, something in his expression told her he was measuring every move, every word. She didn't know it yet, but he had already seen the truth. He had already watched the betrayal unfold on his screens, and he was waiting for the perfect moment to turn the tables. The envious servant leaned against the doorframe, smirking as she watched her prey tremble. She whispered to another maid, "It won't be long. She'll break. They always break." But she was wrong. The girl wasn't breaking. She was hardening. And in the shadows, the master's silence was not indifference. It was preparation. And when the time came, the revelation would shatter the mansion's golden facade. The days that followed became a theater of cruelty. Every corner of the mansion echoed with whispers. Every passing glance reminded her of the accusation. It was not enough that she had been humiliated in front of everyone once. The envious servant seemed determined to turn each hour into a slow, burning punishment. Tasks that had once been shared now fell squarely on her shoulders. She was sent to polish the grand staircase alone, its marble steps stretching endlessly beneath her knees until her hands were raw. She was ordered to carry heavy trays from the kitchens to the banquet hall, while the others smirked and exchanged knowing glances, delighting in her silence. "Don't drop it again," the venomous voice would remind her, slipping into her ear like a blade, soft enough that no one else heard. Wouldn't want another accident. She wanted to shout back, to defend herself, but her words would mean nothing against the carefully woven lie. So she swallowed her anger, letting it burn her from the inside, while on the outside she remained quiet, almost invisible. But invisibility did not protect her. It only gave them more freedom to wound. One evening, as she carried linens through the corridor, she overheard them. Laughter, sharp as glass, coming from the servants' quarters. She paused, her heart racing, and listened. She thought she could get away with it. One voice sneered. "She should be grateful she hasn't been thrown into the street," another added. And then came the envious servant's voice, dripping with false sympathy. "Poor thing. Maybe the master took pity on her, but pity won't save her for long." The words struck harder than the work. Pity. That was worse than hatred. Hatred could be fought. Pity was a brand that clung to your skin, a silent confirmation of guilt. Her eyes burned, but again she did not cry. She remembered the faces of her family, her mother's fragile smile, her brother's hunger, her father's trembling hands. She could not afford to break. Not here, not now. But the cruelty wasn't only in whispers. One night, when the grand hall was filled with guests and music swirled beneath the crystal chandeliers, she was called to serve. Her hands, steady despite the storm inside her, carried a silver tray of wine glasses. She moved carefully between the tables of gowns and tuxedos, heads turning as she passed. And then, sabotage. A foot slid into her path. She stumbled forward, the tray tipping, red wine spilling across the shimmering gown of a wealthy guest. Gasps erupted around the room. "Clumsy girl," someone shouted. Laughter rippled through the hall. She bent quickly, trembling, to clean the mess, her face hot with shame. And there she saw it, the satisfied smirk of her rival, watching from the corner, eyes glinting with triumph. She wanted to scream the truth, to point a finger and expose her. But when she lifted her head, she saw the crowd of faces, every one of them already convinced of her guilt. The humiliation was complete. Her rival had turned her life into a performance, and everyone applauded. But not everyone. From the balcony above, unseen by most, the master watched. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes followed her every move. He had seen the foot, the deliberate act. He had seen the way the rival gloated while she crumbled. He gripped the rail until his knuckles whitened. His silence was no longer passive. It was heavy with purpose. He was watching, waiting, calculating, not just the truth of what had been done, but the depth of the cruelty she had endured. And for the first time, something stirred in him. Not just suspicion, not just the hunger for justice. Something deeper. A question he had never asked before. Why does this matter to me so much? Down below, she gathered the shattered pieces of her pride, forcing her hands not to shake, forcing her tears not to fall. But in the depths of her humiliation, a spark was born. Quiet, fierce, a vow whispered only to herself. They will not destroy me. She didn't know it yet, but the cameras had seen everything. The foot, the fall, the laughter. And the man in the shadows, who held her fate in his hands, was no longer indifferent. He was watching her not as a servant, but as something else. Something he could not yet name. The mansion grew quiet after the banquet, its golden halls now cloaked in shadows. The music had long faded, the laughter evaporated, but the humiliation lingered, echoing in her chest like a wound that wouldn't close. She curled in her small bed, staring at the darkness, replaying the scene over and over. The stumble, the spilled wine, the sharp cries of disgust. But worse than all of it was that smile. Her rival's poisonous smile, carved with triumph. She pressed her fists against her chest, her lips trembling as she whispered into the silence. I won't let her win. I can't. And while she fought her tears alone, in another corner of the mansion, behind heavy locked doors, the master stood before a wall of screens. Flickering black and white images captured every corner of his empire. The glittering hallways, the empty gardens, the silent dining rooms. Each screen a pair of eyes that never slept. He poured himself another drink, though the glass in his hand was already half full. His reflection in the liquor was weary, lined not by age but by distrust. He had built his world on suspicion. He trusted contracts, signatures, and cameras, but never people. People lied. People betrayed. He had learned that lesson long ago. As the footage replayed, he saw it all again. The foot stretched deliberately across her path. The fall, the eruption of laughter, and the rival's victorious grin. His jaw clenched. His hand tightened around the glass until it threatened to shatter. The images pulled him into memories. Memories he despised, but could never escape. Years ago, before the empire was built, there had been another woman. Not a servant, but a partner. He had trusted her, foolishly, with everything. She had smiled, whispered promises of forever, held his hand through the nights of struggle. And while he built, she betrayed. She had stolen not just money, but trust, leaving him to crawl out of the ruins of his own naivety. He had learned then that loyalty was a myth, that kindness was a mask, and that power was the only shield against betrayal. That betrayal had carved him into the man he was now. Cold, unyielding, untouchable. He wore his indifference like armor, his wealth like a fortress. Yet as he stared at the trembling servant on the screen, humiliated by a lie she hadn't spoken, destroyed by a crime she hadn't committed, something inside his chest stirred uncomfortably. It was not pity. He despised pity. It was not curiosity. He already knew the truth. It was something far more dangerous, recognition. She had no power, no voice, no one to defend her. She was trapped in the same kind of cage he had once been, except hers was built not from betrayal of love, but from lies and envy. And she fought, quietly, stubbornly, refusing to collapse even when the weight of the world pressed against her shoulders. For a man who had sworn never to feel again, that spark unsettled him. He leaned closer to the screen, studying the way she held herself after the humiliation. Her chin trembled, her hands shook, but she didn't cry. She swallowed the pain and kept moving. That resilience was rare. That resilience was dangerous. He turned off the monitor, the room plunging into near darkness, lit only by the fire crackling in the hearth. He sipped his drink, though it no longer comforted him. His mind spun with questions he had never allowed himself to ask. Why her? Why did it matter? Why could he not simply dismiss her like all the others? But one answer burned brighter than the rest, because she had been wronged and no one else cared. Meanwhile, on the other side of the mansion, her rival lay comfortably in her bed, her lips curled into a satisfied smile. She believed she had won. She believed the humiliation was complete, the lie unshakable. What she did not know was that the very eyes she had forgotten, the silent cameras she had not noticed, had already turned her victory into a trap. And the master of the house, who had once buried his heart beneath stone, was beginning to care. The mansion was alive again the following evening, its chandeliers blazing, its halls filled with guests who floated in like shadows dressed in silk and velvet. Another banquet, another excuse for laughter, clinking glasses, and the rustle of fortunes parading as charm. For her, however, it was another battlefield. She carried herself carefully, silently, almost as if she could disappear into the golden walls. Every step was calculated, every movement restrained. She had learned that in this house, invisibility was survival. But her rival had no intention of letting her remain invisible. "Fetch the wine," the poisonous voice ordered, her lips twisted into a smirk as she handed over the heavy tray. The weight bit into her arms, but she said nothing. As she stepped forward, weaving through clusters of aristocrats, she felt it, the deliberate shove from behind. Subtle enough to be called an accident, sharp enough to unbalance her. The glasses on the tray trembled, their contents swaying dangerously close to the rim. A gasp escaped her throat, but she steadied herself, tightening her grip. The wine did not spill. Her rival's smirk faltered for only a second, but it was enough. Enough for her to know that this was not carelessness. This was war. She carried on, placing the glasses one by one before the guests. Yet, as she moved away, her rival leaned in close, her whisper slicing through the noise of the hall. "Careful. Next time, I'll make sure you fall harder." The words clung to her like frost. She wanted to reply, to spit the truth into that smirking face, but she swallowed it again. One wrong word could mean her end. So she lowered her eyes and walked away, her silence hiding the storm inside. But not all storms go unseen. From the balcony, the master observed, his expression sharp, his eyes catching every detail. He had seen the shove, the smirk, the calculated cruelty. He gripped the rail again, his jaw set like stone. The urge to intervene burned within him, but he remained still. Intervention would expose the cameras too soon, reveal his knowledge before the right moment. And this was not about pity, it was about justice. True justice required patience, and patience was the only weapon stronger than money. Later that night, when the guests had left and the mansion lay in silence, the rival struck again. This time, it was not humiliation in public, but a dagger in the dark. She cornered the servant in the linen room, slamming the door shut behind her. The walls were lined with folded sheets and polished silver, but the air grew heavy with malice. "Do you know what happens to girls like you?" she hissed, her eyes glinting with something feral. "They vanish. One mistake, and you're thrown out into the streets. Do you want to watch your family starve because of you? Do you want to drag their name through the mud along with yours?" The words pierced deeper than any wound. Her lips trembled, but she did not answer. The rival stepped closer, her breath sharp, her voice low. "I'll give you a chance. Leave. Disappear before the master decides to throw you out himself. If you stay, I'll make sure no one ever believes a word you say." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of her racing heartbeat. She could leave. She could escape the torment, the whispers, the endless humiliation. But leaving meant surrender. Leaving meant letting the lie win, letting the cruelty carve her life into ruins. Her hands curled into fists, her chin lifting slightly, though her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I'm not leaving." The rival's smile widened, cruel and sharp. "Then you'll regret it." She brushed past her, her perfume cloying and suffocating, and the door slammed behind her. Alone in the linen room, she leaned against the shelves, her chest heaving, her eyes burning. Fear twisted inside her, but alongside it was something else, resolve. The rival could break her body, her pride, her reputation. But she cannot break her spirit. Not yet. And while she stood trembling in the shadows, unaware, a figure watched from the corridor's end. The master had been passing by, his steps silent, and though he had not heard every word, he had seen enough, the cornering, the threats, the malice. He turned away before she noticed him, his face unreadable, but inside, a decision began to form. The time for patience was running short. The following morning broke with the scent of rain lingering in the air, soft droplets tapping against the mansion's tall windows. She woke early, as always, her body aching from work, her mind weary from battles she couldn't win aloud. Yet when she stood before the mirror in her small room, the reflection that stared back was not shattered. Her eyes were tired, her hands raw, but her chin lifted just slightly higher. I won't give her the satisfaction, she thought. She moved through the mansion's silent corridors, carrying out her tasks with precision. Polishing, sweeping, serving. But today, she felt something shift in the air. The stares of the other servants still followed her, filled with suspicion and mockery, yet beneath them was something else. Doubt. Whispers had a way of spreading, but so did cracks and lies. Perhaps they had seen too much. Perhaps her rival's cruelty was drawing more attention than she realized. By mid-afternoon, she was called to the master's study. Her heart nearly stopped. No one summoned her there, not unless punishment awaited. She stood frozen before the heavy oak door, her knuckles hovering, before she knocked softly. Enter. The voice was deep, commanding, with the weight of authority that silenced even the proudest of men. She pushed the door open, stepping inside. The study was vast, lined with shelves of leather-bound books, the scent of wood and smoke heavy in the air. Behind a massive desk, he sat, his gaze fixed on her like a hawk studying prey, or perhaps something else. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together. "You called for me, sir?" He did not answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning her, not with disgust, but with something far more dangerous, scrutiny. "Tell me," he began slowly, "what kind of person steals from the hand that feeds them?" Her chest tightened. Was this a trap? Her lips parted, but no words came. She feared that whatever she said would be twisted against her. I don't know, sir," she finally whispered. He leaned forward now, his elbows resting on the desk, his voice lowering like a blade dragged against stone. And if someone were accused of such a crime, falsely, what should they do? The question stunned her. It wasn't a direct accusation, nor was it absolution. It was something else, a test. Her breath shook, but she forced her voice to steady. They should hold on to the truth, even if no one believes it. His eyes narrowed, searching her face for cracks, for signs of deceit. He saw none, only raw honesty, trembling but unbroken. A silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating, as if the entire world hung on the answer she had given. Finally, he rose from his chair, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. He moved to the window, looking out at the rain streaking down the glass. His voice was softer now, but still edged with something sharp. "Loyalty is rare," he said. "Rarer still is the strength to endure when the world turns against you." He turned his head slightly, just enough to catch her expression. "Do you have that strength?" Her throat ached. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to scream that she had endured every humiliation, every whisper, every lie, and still she stood. But the words tangled inside her. All she could do was meet his gaze with eyes that burned, not with tears, but with fire. For the first time, his expression shifted. Not pity, not disdain, but something far more unsettling for a man who had sworn off emotions. Recognition. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Go." She bowed her head, her heart pounding, and left the study, her mind reeling. She didn't know what game he was playing, but she felt it. Something had changed. Later that evening, as she carried linens across the corridor, she overheard her rival laughing with another servant. "She won't last. He'll throw her out soon. Men like him don't forgive. He'll crush her like the insect she is." But in the shadows, unseen by them, the master stood at the top of the stairs, listening, his lips curved, not in amusement, not in cruelty, but in decision. The rival believed she had already won. She believed her lies were unshakable. But she had forgotten one thing. In this house, the walls had eyes, and the man she thought she could manipulate was watching closer than ever before. He whispered to himself, so low no one could hear, "Patience, and then justice." The mansion was buzzing again, preparing for yet another night of glitter and wealth. The kind of night when masks were worn not just on faces but on hearts, smiles stretched wide, while daggers hid behind every polite word. She moved silently through the hall, adjusting the silverware, setting each crystal glass perfectly in its place. The bruises of humiliation still clung to her like shadows, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. Yet, as she worked, her rival watched from the corner, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp with hatred that only grew more poisonous each day. Humiliation had not been enough. Whispers had not been enough. Even threats in the linen room had failed to break her. The rival's lips curled into a smile that promised something far darker. If lies and whispers couldn't destroy her, then perhaps something louder, something that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind, would. That afternoon, when the corridors were quieter, the rival slipped into the master's private chamber. She had stolen the key weeks ago, waiting for the right moment. Her hands shook as she rummaged through the drawers, her pulse quickening when her fingers brushed against something cold, metallic, valuable. A gold watch, engraved with the master's initials. She smiled wickedly, tucking it into a small pouch she had prepared. The plan was perfect. The watch would be found in the servant's belongings, sealing her fate forever. And yet, in her haste, she forgot the one thing that had always watched silently. The cameras. Unseen by her, a lens in the corner followed her every move. Its unblinking eye captured the theft, the smirk, the careful hiding. Far away, in his study, the master's monitor flickered. He watched, his expression unreadable, as the rival set the trap. His jaw tightened, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair. Every instinct screamed to act immediately, to expose her treachery in front of everyone. But he forced himself into stillness. Timing was everything. To destroy a lie, one needed not just truth but spectacle. The very cruelty she had unleashed would become her downfall. That evening, the grand hall shimmered with light as the guests arrived. Music swelled, laughter filled the air, and the rival moved like a predator circling its prey. She cornered the head servant, her voice pitched high with fake concern. "I saw her acting strangely near the master's study earlier," she said, her tone sweetened with poison. "Perhaps someone should check her things. It would be tragic if another theft occurred." The suggestion spread like fire. Murmurs rippled through the servants, suspicion reigniting like dry wood catching flame. All eyes turned once again to the accused. When they searched her small room, the pouch was waiting, neatly tucked beneath her blanket. Gasps filled the space. The gold watch glinted under the lamplight, its shine like a cruel spotlight on her face. She froze, her breath caught in her chest. Her hands trembled as she shook her head violently. "No, I didn't put that there. I've never even touched it." Her voice cracked with desperation, but the whispers rose louder. She lied before. She stole again. She can't be trusted. Tears threatened to burn her eyes, but she fought them back, her voice breaking with raw pain. "Please believe me. I didn't do this." Her rival stepped forward, her face the picture of sorrow, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry, but we can't ignore the evidence." The words struck like a blade. It was happening again. Humiliation, betrayal, her life unraveling thread by thread before an audience that cared only for scandal. And then, the heavy sound of footsteps. The master entered the room. Silence fell instantly, the kind of silence that choked the air. He looked at the gold watch in the pouch, then at her trembling hands, then finally at the rival's sorrowful face. His eyes narrowed, sharp as steel. For a moment, no one breathed. Her rival's lips curved slightly, confident, victorious. But inside his chest, something colder stirred. He had seen everything. He knew the truth. And though the room was thick with lies, he was ready. But not yet. Not here. To destroy a serpent, one must wait until its fangs were bared for all to see. Enough, he said quietly, his voice carrying more power than a shout. Leave us. The servants dispersed reluctantly, the rival hiding her smirk as she curtsied. She believed her plan had worked flawlessly, but she had no idea that the stage she had built for her victim would soon become her own execution ground. Left alone, she collapsed to her knees, sobs breaking free. Her voice shook as she pleaded, I didn't do it. Please, you must believe me. He stood in silence, his eyes fixed on her, his face unreadable. Finally, he turned away, his voice calm, almost chilling. Truth always finds a way. And without another word, he left her kneeling in the dark. The days after the discovery of the watch were darker than anything she had endured before. What little dignity she had clung to was stripped away, and now, every corner of the mansion had become a cage of whispers and stares. Servants who once ignored her now sneered openly. Guests looked upon her as though she were dirt clinging to polished marble. The rival's triumph was complete, or so it seemed. She worked in silence, her hands trembling as she scrubbed the endless marble floors. The water turned her skin raw, but she didn't stop. If she paused, if she let herself think, the shame would crush her completely. Each bucket she carried felt heavier, not with water, but with the weight of their judgment. One afternoon, she overheard two maids gossiping in the corridor. They say he's going to dismiss her soon, one whispered. Dismiss? No. I heard he might hand her over to the authorities. Theft from a master himself? That's prison. The other gasped, delight curling her words. Imagine her face when they drag her out of here in chains. She pressed herself against the wall, biting her lip until blood filled her mouth. Her eyes burned, but still she refused to cry. Tears were useless here. They would not change the truth. That evening, she returned to her small room, collapsing on the thin mattress. For the first time, despair won. She buried her face in her hands, the sobs coming uncontrollably, shaking her fragile frame. Why? Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? Her voice cracked, echoing in the silence of the empty room. Her rival, in the meantime, relished every second of her suffering. She walked through the mansion with her head held high, her laughter sharp, her lies spreading like wildfire. She whispered to anyone who would listen, weaving stories of how she had always suspected the girl, how she had tried to warn them, how no one else had seen what she had seen. Each word tightened the noose around her victim's neck. And yet, not everyone was convinced. The master watched from the shadows, his silence like a blade waiting to strike. He had not confronted her directly since the night he dismissed the others from her room, but he had not ignored her either. He observed her carefully, noting how she continued to work despite the humiliation, how she endured cruelty without breaking, how her eyes still carried a spark of defiance even when her body trembled. One night, unable to stop himself, he summoned her again. She entered his study, her head bowed, her heart racing. You asked me once if I believed you, he said slowly, his voice low and deliberate. Tell me again, why should I? She lifted her head, her eyes wet but burning. Because I have nothing else to give you but the truth, she whispered. You can take everything from me, my work, my home, my dignity, but you cannot take my honesty. If I say I didn't do it, it's because I didn't. Her words hung in the air, trembling yet unbreakable. He studied her in silence. His mind warred with itself. For years, he had trusted no one, had built walls higher than the very mansion they stood in. But here she was, fragile, powerless, yet speaking with a conviction that shattered through every wall he had built. And without meaning to, he spoke words he hadn't planned. What would you do, he asked, his gaze piercing, if the truth came alight? If those who mocked you saw that you were innocent all along? Her breath caught. For the first time, a flicker of hope glimmered in her chest. I would hold my head high, she whispered. Not because they believed me, but because I never stopped believing in myself. The words pierced him deeper than he cared to admit. He dismissed her quickly after, But long after she had gone, her voice echoed in his study. Meanwhile, her rival planned the final strike. Humiliation had been sweet, but she wanted destruction. She wanted her rival gone forever. That night, she slipped again into the master's study, her hands eager, her eyes gleaming. She would plant something bigger, something that no one could ever defend against. Perhaps forged documents, perhaps money missing from the master's safe. She whispered to herself as she worked, "Tomorrow, she's finished." What she didn't know was that the cameras had already caught every move. And this time, the master wasn't just watching. He was preparing. The mansion gleamed brighter than ever that night. It was an evening of celebration, a gathering of men and women whose fortunes were measured not in gold, but in empires. Crystal chandeliers threw shards of light across the grand hall. Violins sang in the background, and laughter rose like smoke from every corner. It was the perfect stage, not for celebration, but for destruction. And one woman intended to make it so. The rival moved like a queen through the servants' corridors, her plan already in motion. Tucked within her apron was the final piece of her scheme, a thick envelope she had stolen from the master's office, filled with important documents. By dawn, it would be found in the wrong hands, and no one would question who had put it there. The girl's fate would be sealed forever. Not dismissal this time, not whispers. Prison, ruin. In her small room, the accused sat alone, her hands clenched in her lap, her body trembling. She could feel something in the air, something heavy, suffocating, as though the night itself was conspiring against her. She prayed silently, her lips moving with words she barely believed anymore. Please, let this end. Please, let someone see the truth. Meanwhile, in his study, the master sat before the glowing monitors. His eyes never left the screen as he watched the rival slither into the corridors, sliding the stolen envelope beneath a folded sheet in the laundry room. His jaw tightened, but his face betrayed no emotion. He pressed a button, the footage freezing on her smiling face. This was it, the final act. And tonight, he would let the serpent bare its fangs in front of the entire world. As the banquet swelled with music and voices, the rival gave her performance. She floated to the head servant, her voice dripping with concern. I think something terrible has happened," she whispered just loud enough to be overheard. "I saw her near the laundry earlier. Perhaps it would be wise to check." The words spread like wildfire. Murmurs swept across the hall, and soon, the head servant barked orders. Within minutes, the laundry room was filled with servants tearing through the piles of linen. And there, as planned, they found it. The master's stolen documents hidden neatly where no servant should ever have access. Gasps filled the room, accusations flew, and before she could even speak, rough hands seized her wrists. No, I didn't," she cried, struggling against their grip, her voice breaking. "I've never seen that before. Please, you have to believe me." The rival stepped into the room, her face a portrait of false pity, her voice quivering as though she were heartbroken. "Oh, how could you? After everything this house has given you, how could you betray us like this?" Her words cut deeper than any knife. The accused collapsed to her knees, her cries drowned by the storm of voices around her. Every face was turned against her. Every whisper stabbed at her soul. For the first time, she felt she might not survive this humiliation. But then, the heavy doors of the grand hall opened, and silence fell. The master entered. His presence commanded the room instantly. Tall, broad, his gaze colder than steel, he walked slowly, deliberately, each step echoing like a hammer striking stone. The servants parted, the guests hushed, even the rival's confident smirk faltered. He stopped in the center of the room, his eyes sweeping across the scene. The trembling girl on her knees, the damning envelope in the hands of the head servant, the rival's mask of sorrow hiding triumph beneath. "Explain," he said, his voice calm, almost deadly. The rival stepped forward eagerly, lowering her eyes as though she carried the weight of sorrow. "Master, I am sorry to bring you such shame, but I discovered that she has been stealing from you again. We found your documents in her room. She cannot deny it now. Gasps rose again. The girl shook her head violently, her tears falling. Please, it's not true. You have to believe me, Silence, he commanded. His voice cut through the room, silencing her instantly. His eyes, sharp as blades, turned slowly toward the rival. And you, he said softly, how do you know so much of what she does? The rival faltered, but quickly regained her composure, bowing her head. I only saw her near the laundry. I thought it was my duty to protect you, sir. His lips curved, not into a smile, but something colder, sharper. Indeed, duty. He turned, walking toward the head of the hall where a large monitor had been wheeled discreetly into place. The crowd watched in confusion, murmurs spreading again. The rival's confidence flickered, and then, with the press of a button, the screen came alive. Gasps filled the hall as grainy footage played for all to see. The rival slipping into the study, stealing the envelope, hiding it in the laundry. The camera had caught every second. The smirk on her face, the precision of her movements, the malice in her eyes. The hall erupted. Servants shouted, guests recoiled, eyes turned from the accused to the rival with horror. The rival stumbled back, her mask shattering. No, it's not what it looks like. The master's voice thundered through the hall, silencing the chaos. It is exactly what it looks like. Every lie, every humiliation, every false accusation. His eyes narrowed, his gaze burning into the rival's trembling form. You thought yourself clever, but the truth cannot be buried forever. And you, he turned toward the girl still kneeling, her face wet with tears, were never guilty. For the first time, the hall turned. Eyes that once mocked her now widened with shame, with regret. But their regret meant nothing. The damage had been done. She lifted her gaze slowly, her breath trembling, her body shaking with disbelief. He had saved her. He had exposed the truth. And in that moment, as the rival collapsed into sobs, begging for mercy that would never come, the master's eyes met hers. In them, she saw not pity, not indifference, but something dangerous, something powerful. Recognition. The rival's downfall echoed through the mansion for days. Once admired for her composure and trusted for her loyalty, she had become a pariah overnight. The other servants who once whispered with her now avoided her like plague, their eyes shifting away as though betrayal were contagious. She was dismissed swiftly, her screams of protest fading into silence as the gates closed behind her. But even with the truth revealed, even with her innocence proven before every eye, the accused did not feel free. Shame clung to her skin like a second shadow. She could not walk through the hallways without remembering the laughter, the gasps, the accusing fingers pointed at her. People apologized now, some with hushed words, others with guilty glances, but their remorse felt hollow. They had believed the lie. They had enjoyed her humiliation. At night, alone in her room, she pressed her hands over her face, whispering into the darkness, "It's over. It's over." But it didn't feel over. The scars remained. One evening, as she scrubbed the silverware in the kitchen, she felt the presence before she saw him. She froze, her heart thundering in her chest as the master entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. The other servants straightened instantly, their chatter dying into silence. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand, leaving only the two of them in the quiet. Her hands trembled as she continued polishing, her eyes fixed on the silver as though it were her lifeline. "Sir," she whispered, barely audible. He approached slowly, his steps deliberate. "You've endured much," he said finally, his voice low measured. "More than anyone should have." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I don't know why this happened to me," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to stand out. I only wanted to work, to send money to my family, to live quietly." And yet, her words choked into silence, tears threatening to spill. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, he spoke words she never expected. "You remind me of myself." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "You?" He nodded once, his expression dark, shadowed by old pain. "Once, I trusted someone I should not have. I gave them everything, my heart, my faith, my future. And they destroyed it all. They left me with nothing but ashes. From that day, I swore I would never believe in anyone again. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. Until now, her breath caught, her chest tightening painfully. She shook her head slightly, unable to understand. "Why me?" she whispered. His gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. "Because you stood when the world tried to crush you. Because you told the truth when lies would have been easier. Because you endured humiliation and still kept your dignity. That strength is rarer than gold." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not of shame this time, but of something she had not felt in so long. Hope. She bowed her head, her voice trembling. "I don't feel strong. I feel broken." He reached out then, slowly, cautiously, as though touching her would shatter the armor he had built around himself for years. His fingers brushed beneath her chin, lifting her face gently until her eyes met his. "Scars are not weakness," he murmured. "They're proof you survive." Her breath shook as she stared into his eyes, seeing not just wealth and power, but pain and humanity hidden beneath layers of stone. And for the first time, she realized he was not untouchable. He was as scarred as she was. He withdrew his hand, his walls snapping back into place, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper. "Rest," he said, his voice brisk once more. "You'll work no more tonight." She nodded silently, her chest trembling with emotions she could not name. As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway, his voice carrying back to her like a vow. "You are no longer invisible in this house." Her tears flowed freely then, though she smiled faintly through them. For the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, her suffering had not been in vain. But the mansion's golden halls were never free of shadows. And as she drifted into uneasy sleep that night, she had no idea that beyond the gates, revenge was already brewing. The rival, cast out in disgrace, had not disappeared quietly. Her hatred had only grown sharper, and she swore she would return, not just to reclaim her pride, but to destroy the woman who had taken everything from her. The days following the revelation carried a strange quiet. The mansion, once heavy with whispers, now tiptoed around her with guilt. Servants lowered their eyes when she passed, ashamed of the cruelty they had once celebrated. Guests who had mocked her now offered hollow smiles, careful nods of acknowledgement. It was strange, almost surreal. After so much humiliation, the silence of regret felt louder than their accusations ever had. And yet, even as the weight of injustice slowly lifted, she could not rest. Every corner of the house reminded her of what she had endured. The ballroom where she had stumbled, the corridor where she had been cornered, the laundry where evidence had been planted. Each place whispered of pain, scars etched into the very walls. Still, she worked, not because she had to. He had quietly ordered that her tasks be lightened, but because work anchored her, gave her hands something to hold when her heart trembled. It was during one such evening, as she folded linens in the fading light, that he appeared again. The master stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting long shadows. He did not speak immediately, only watched her as though trying to read the weight of her silence. "You should not still be working," he said at last, his voice low but firm. She bowed her head. "Work keeps me from thinking too much, sir." He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on her trembling hands. "You thought too much already. Rest." Her lips parted, as though to protest, but the words died on her tongue. There was no defying him, not when his gaze held not only command but something else, something gentler, though hidden behind iron walls. In the days that followed, his presence became more frequent. At first in silence, he would appear as she worked, watching quietly, his eyes lingering longer than necessary. Then with words, small questions, fragments of conversation that chipped away at the distance between them. He asked about her family, her past, her dreams. She answered carefully at first, wary, but gradually her voice grew steadier, her walls thinning. One night, under the glow of the chandeliers, he spoke words that made her breath catch. "You are stronger than anyone here, stronger than even you realize." Her heart raced, But she looked away, her voice trembling. Strength is nothing when the world refuses to see it. His gaze sharpened. Then I will make them see. The promise in his tone unsettled her, both frightening and comforting. She had never asked to be seen. She had only wanted to survive. And yet now, under his gaze, she felt both terrified and alive in ways she could not explain. But while something fragile and dangerous bloomed between them, beyond the gates, in the cold silence of the world outside, hatred stirred. The rival had not disappeared into obscurity, as the servants believed. She had wandered the dark alleys of the city, her pride shattered, her name smeared with disgrace. But humiliation did not destroy her. It sharpened her like a blade. She replayed the night of her downfall again and again. The gasps of the crowd, the master's cold voice exposing her, the girl's trembling eyes as she was lifted from ruin to vindication. Rage consumed her. That girl, that servant, had taken everything from her, her place, her pride, her power. She could not bear it. And so, night after night, she plotted. She returned to the mansion's gates, cloaked in shadows, watching from the dark. She saw how the master now lingered near the servant he had once questioned, how his eyes followed her, how his silence softened in her presence. It was unbearable. Not only had she been cast out, but the girl had taken the one thing she never dared to dream of, the master's favor. Her lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. If humiliation could not destroy her, then fear would. And so, the rival prepared her final act. Not whispers, not lies, but something far more dangerous. She would slip back into the golden walls one last time, armed with the kind of vengeance that leaves scars deeper than shame. Inside, the girl knelt by her bed, whispering a prayer of gratitude for the fragile peace she felt at last. She did not know that outside, in the shadows, the serpent was already returning, ready to strike with venom darker than ever before. The storm came not with thunder, but with silence. It was a night like any other in a mansion, the chandeliers glowing, the air thick with the faint scent of polished wood and roses from the gardens. She moved quietly through the corridors, carrying linens pressed to perfection, her heart steady for the first time in months. The weight of humiliation had not vanished, but it had softened, replaced by something fragile and new. Hope. Yet outside the gates, in the cloak of night, another heart beat with venom. The rival had returned. Her eyes burned with fury as she slipped through a forgotten servant's passage she had once used in secret trysts of gossip and mischief. Her hands clenched tightly around a blade, not of steel, but of revenge, sharpened with humiliation. Tonight, she would end the girl's triumph. Inside, the accused knelt in the dining hall, carefully adjusting the polished silver for the morning. Her thoughts drifted to her mother's smile when she could finally send money, to her brother's laughter, to the master's words echoing in her mind. You are no longer invisible in this house. A faint smile touched her lips. For once, she allowed herself to believe. But the serpent had already entered the garden. The rival appeared in the doorway, her shadow long and twisted by the flickering candles. The girl froze, the linen slipping from her hands, her chest tightening as if the very air had turned to ice. You, she whispered. The rival's smile was sharp, cruel. Did you think it was over? Did you think he would protect you forever? No. Tonight, you'll learn what it means to take what isn't yours. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing against the marble floor. The girl's back pressed against the table, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Fear clawed at her throat, but beneath it, defiance stirred. You destroyed yourself, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I didn't take anything from you. The rival laughed, the sound jagged, broken. You took everything. My place, my pride, his attention. Her eyes gleamed with madness. But not for long. She lunged, and in that instant, the heavy doors of the hall burst open. The master strode in, his voice cutting through the chaos like thunder. Enough. The rival froze, the blade trembling in her hand. Her eyes widened as she realized too late. He had been expecting her. Cameras had tracked her every step, guards had been stationed quietly in the shadows. Her plan had never stood a chance. Two guards surged forward, seizing her arms as she screamed and fought, her cries echoing through the Golden Hall. "She doesn't deserve you. She doesn't deserve anything. She's nothing." Her words bounced off the walls, desperate and hollow. The master's gaze, cold and unyielding, silenced her with a single look. "You have destroyed yourself with your own envy. There is no place for you here." As the rival was dragged out, her screams fading into the distance, silence fell once more. The girl stood trembling, her body weak from fear, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She could barely breathe, barely move. And then she felt it, a hand, steady and strong, closing around hers. She looked up. The master stood before her, his expression softer than she had ever seen, his eyes no longer hiding behind walls of stone. For the first time, the fortress had opened, and within it there was vulnerability. "You endured," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "Through lies, through humiliation, through cruelty, you stood when others would have broken. I cannot ignore that." Her lips parted, her breath shaking. "Why? Why me?" His gaze held hers, unwavering. "Because in you, I found what I thought no longer existed: truth, loyalty, strength, and I will not lose that." And there, in the grand hall where she had once been broken, he lowered himself slightly, his voice trembling not with weakness, but with honesty. "Marry me." Her heart stopped. The words seemed impossible, unreal, yet they carried the weight of certainty, of finality. Gasps echoed faintly from the shadows, servants who had lingered unseen. But in that moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she shook her head in disbelief. I don't deserve this. I'm nothing." He silenced her with a single touch, his hand brushing away her tears. "You are everything." And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe. Allowed herself to feel the weight of her suffering lifted, transformed into something she never dreamed possible. In the place where her shame had once been carved deepest, a new story began. She was accused, humiliated, betrayed, but in the end, the truth triumphed, and love rose from the ashes of pain. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the tales that remind us how fate can turn in the blink of an eye. And tell me in the comments, from what city are you watching this story unfold?